Here I got a question. Someone here in London listens to a shir, perhaps in French, perhaps it's from Eretz Israel, and that's what I gathered. And the Maggid Shir had said that when you're mafresh challah, you have to do it immediately. As soon as you've made the dough, you should be separating the challah and not wait until the dough has risen and all that. So I asked, what I do in the kitchen is basically eating, also tasting, but I don't usually do the cooking. So I asked, what's usually the seder? So my wife says that sometimes she's concerned that you put in the yeast, etc., it might not rise. So wait till it rises. But let's look at the halacha. So the first thing we have on the top right is a Mishnah. It's a Mishnah in Challah, Perek Gimel. As soon as she's added the water, she should separate challah. There's two nuskos. What that means is, provided the water and flour, there's already the measure of the adequate amount of flour is already mixed into the water. So then you can already take challah. That's if you say sheyehei. If you say shelo yehei, means that what we've said here is, as soon as you've mixed the flour, you should take challah. But if there's still another it's a large bowl, and besides what has become dough, there's still more flour which is loose, which hasn't been mixed into the dough, so it's too early because you have to take challah from that flour also. Either way, it does say in the Mishnah that as soon as she put in the water and she's combined early beginnings of the dough before the dough has risen, so then magba'as chalos. So when I was on the phone with this lady, I thought it was because of the idea of zrizin makdim la mitzvah. You should do a mitzvah as early as possible. But then I looked up, and it turns out we don't have Gemara on Challah, but there is a Yerushalmi, and the reason for the rush is because of Tumah v'Tara. The worry is that you're going to, in those times, you set aside a piece of challah, and then you give it to the kohen, and the kohen would eat it. Now, what would happen if you are mixing the challah, and then you're going to leave it around? The longer you leave it unattended, the more likely there could be a mishap, that someone, something of tumah will touch it. And therefore, in those times when tumah v'tara was applicable, then you would do it as soon as possible. So that's what the Mishnah is talking about. There's a rush to take challah. Is talking when the dinim of tumah v'tara were noyeg, and you give the piece of challah to the kohen. Therefore, that makes it not so. Nowadays, which unfortunately we don't have that a gift to the kohen. Therefore, it's not such a rush. Then there's another issue here. You're making a dough, and some of the flour is not mixed in. Now that flour which is not mixed in is not part of the hafroshas challah, so to speak. So now on the bottom left, here is a quote from the Bar Tanura, who's commenting on that Mishnah. And he says that when you have a dough, which is part dough and part flour, and you take challah early, you should have in mind the flour also, which is going to be, in other words, it's now 3:05, and at 3:10, at 3:05, there's flour which is not part of the dough. At 3:10, it will be part of the dough. When I take the piece of challah on 3:05, I have in mind for the challah, for the flour, which will join also at 3:10. That's how a person should educate the people, the women who are doing the baking. If they are going to be mafresh challah, as soon as they've made the dough, before they bake it, shape the loaves, they should say, I'm having in mind also the flour which will be added later. Let's now go to the right. We have here the commentary of Rebbe Akiva Eiger. Rebbe Akiva Eiger, as we know, he was a contemporary of the Mittler Rebbe, of the Alter Rebbe, and he has got these short his comments on the side of the Mishnayos, many of them just quotes from earlier Sforim. And he writes the following. So he's commenting, you see that little circle, that symbol is to tell you, look at the Rebbe Akiva Eiger. So he writes the following: why should she? What's the concern with this? So he says, "Mipnei shema'arvos kemach im hanikrotzos v'shor she'orchim oiso v'yosim oiso kikros." If you're making loaves, yeah, when you're making challahs, you put some fresh flour on the table as you're rolling the dough. You take more flour. So you've got the flour which you mix in directly with the water in the mixing bowl, but then as you're shaping, you put more flour on the table, and that's helping you shape the loaves. It's unlikely that you'll have, 3 pounds or whatever of flour mixed into one challah. Of course not. You're not going to mix in so much flour whilst you're shaping. But given the ben kula ikore heirevoim. But let's say you're doing a large batch. I'm told it's unlikely, but let's say you're doing a very large batch, and it's possible that you actually use 3 pounds of flour with all of those loaves. Now, if you have taken challah earlier, so then these 3 pounds of flour haven't been taken challah from. Now you put them into the oven. Hatanur b'tzarfon. Then they're going to come as one because they're all in the one oven. And if let's say you took challah, threw it straight into the fire, and now you've got here all of this flour which was now made into dough, and the challah hasn't been taken. So that's what he's saying here. You should have in mind the flour which will be mixed in. One last point, and here we have. I looked around. I've got one of these specialists for him on challah, and he gives a reference to the Kaf HaChaim and Din Reish Ben Beis Erev Shabbos, who refers to the Arizal. And this is from the Sefer Shar HaMitzvahs of the Arizal. Now, I got mixed up. I first looked up Talmei HaMitzvahs of the Arizal, and I couldn't find the point. So then I looked up in Shar HaMitzvahs. The Tim is similar, but the Shar HaMitzvahs is more detailed here. This is Shar HaMitzvahs in Parashat Shlach. That's where the mitzvah of challah is written in the Torah. So the Arizal is quoted here to say, Gam tzorech li, is very unusual. You would have expected it's all Kabbalah, but here it's pretty much a balabata shehalocha. When you says the Arizal, if you're making a very soft dough, and as you are on the rolling board, you're adding more flour. Why do you add flour as you're rolling the dough? They shouldn't stick to your hands. It shouldn't stick to the board. When you are mafresh challah before making it, you should have in mind the flour which will be added later, which you will do so it shouldn't get stuck. And he gives a reference to the Ran and Kiddushin. And then he writes, he says it's an advantage actually to only separate the challah after you've shaped the loaves. And then to burn the challah, because if you had separated the challah and burned it too early, it doesn't help for the kemach. So what we're seeing here, to summarize, it's quite confusing. We have here in the Zman HaMishnah, when Tumah V'Tara is applicable, as soon as possible, because of worry of Tumah V'Tara. Then we have doing it too early, and you have a chashash of a lot of flour being mixed in, would be a question, and therefore would be better to take the challah after shaping the loaves. Lepoil, that's not the minig either. As far as I understand, the women will wait till the dough rises, and then they will separate the challah before they shape the loaves. So it seems to be neither here nor there. All right, this I just mentioned before, the chashash, if you're worried that the dough won't work out, so you take it once the dough is made. But in any event, if you are going to take the dough separate the dough before you shape the challahs, so then you should have in mind that you should also include any flour which will be added later. Let me add one more point whilst we're on the topic of challah. I had my weekly slot in the Beis Horoah on 140 Stamford Hill this morning, and a lady called up and she asked that she's made several sponge cakes. Now, each sponge cake you don't use a sheer challah in a sponge cake. You use a 1 pound or whatever it may be. You don't use 3 pounds in one sponge cake. But she made several sponge cakes, and then she put them all into one box. Now, in the one box, there's more than a sheer challah. And there's the concept of syrup salt, that the basket, they're all in one basket, makes them all into one sheer challah. Now, actually, the late Rav Falk, in his Sefer Machzor Eliyahu, he has a long discussion about the freezer. When you've made lots of small cakes, which are less than a sheer challah, then you put them all into a freezer, because it's we just now saw about the oven combining. He talks about the freezer, which is like one big keli. I don't remember his conclusion over there. Lepoil, what did I tell this lady? I told her it's a good point, very nice shaila. I told her to be mafresh a piece, but without a bracha. The reason being that the Tzemach Tzedek has got a tshuva in Yeridea, and he says he's malamed schus on the fact that people don't take challah from a dough, well, from a lekech. And he has a very interesting mahalach. He says this. What's the bracha on lekech? We know the bracha is mezonos. But really, the svara would have been a lekech, like what's the bracha on chocolate brownie? Come on. A chocolate brownie is a piece of sugar. It's got a bit of flour in it. But the halacha says mezonos becomes a balabos. Mezonos dominates. So therefore, the bracha on the chocolate brownie is mezonos. But he says, as far as challah is concerned, I'm going to look at it more as a sweet rather than as a pastry. And that's basically his limud zchus, why the minig is that people don't take challah from lekeh, from a honey cake. So that on that basis, I mean, I didn't ask the woman for the recipe and how much sugar she puts in all her sponge cakes. But let's say there is a lot of sugar, so then we have reason to say it may not be chayiv b'challah. That's what I told the she should take a piece of a cake, put it aside, put it together, burn it, whatever. But she can say harizah challah, but she shouldn't have the bracha because of brachas. Okay, let's go on to the next point. We have here.
Question on the challah.
Yes.
Is the mitzvah on the challah or on the person? I.e., if the process is shared between two people, does the person taking challah matter, or as long as challah is taken at the right stage?
The mitzvah of a process challah is a duty on the owner. He can delegate it, he or she can delegate it. So if the person's mafresh challah has got the authority to do so, let's say if I'm working in a bakery, I don't own the bakery, but if I'm taking challah because the owner told me to do it, that would be fine. But if I would just take it without permission, separate it without being authorized to do so, that wouldn't be okay. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's move on.
Can I ask you a question?
Go on.
If you have two different types of dough, like one's a wholemeal dough and one's a white flour dough,
okay,
can you misbalance them or not?
So the issue is very common now. People have got various diets, intolerances. If there's a kpeda that they shouldn't touch, no, so someone has got they have such intolerance that they mustn't. The dough which you're making for them mustn't touch the other dough. So if you are makpid that they shouldn't touch, then they're not mitzdarif. But if you're not makpid, then they are mitzdarif, and the Rav Kadamil, so you can make them touch. And then you can make one, in other words, you've got a small batch of spelt flour and small batch of wheat flour, let's say. So if they together, whatever the shear is, 3 pounds or whatever it is, and you're not makpid that they should touch, then it's started to be able to mafish challah. Let's move.
Which one do you take though? Which do you take from, either or both?
Either, doesn't matter. I just want to finish off and say thank you to Rav Shneur Zalman Odds for coming forward to sponsor this year. The costs which are, we have Baruch Hashem a shul website, and so the sponsorship will go to, and the shiurim are uploaded on the shul website. So whoever wants to sponsor, so that will go to the cost of operating the website and putting the stuff on. And since we're already talking about that, I want to say that whether it's here or any other part of the world, I'm sure every shul is incurring costs in relation to the measures for COVID or anti-COVID, whatever you want to call it. And just encourage everyone to contribute to defray the cost of their particular relevant shul or whatever facility to be able to keep us all safe, and wish you all a good Shabbos, and we should meet in good health. To be as Goyal Tzedek, im Heir of Yameinu, Amen. Shabbos.
Amen. Shkoyach.